Hello, I am Jennifer Malone and I am a cybersecurity consultant. Today, I will be talking about the cyber red triangle. Let's dive into it. Before we dive into the cyber red triangle, let's dive into the red triangle of the Pacific Ocean, where great white sharks lurk. There's a red triangle in Northern California. And this red triangle is near San Francisco. It starts in the north in Bodega Bay, goes out to the west to the Farallon Islands, and it goes to the south in Point Sur. The great white sharks lurk here because there's plenty for them to eat. There's sea lions, seals, and a whole lot more. Unfortunately, sometimes people are out in the ocean as well, and the sharks will make a mistake and attack the people. So, what does this have to do with cybersecurity? Well, there's a red triangle in cyberspace as well. I call it the red triangle of cyberspace. You have a triangle with human users in the middle of it, and then you have the first vertex, email, then the second vertex is the internet, and then the third is the user endpoints. And what you have is attackers lurking on the outside. And what'll happen is they will come in and attack users who are swimming in their emails, surfing the web, and writing their endpoints. And then sometimes after they've come into the endpoints, they'll cruise over to the servers where the juicy data reside, and they will chomp down on the data there and exfiltrate it. So what do we do about that? We need to prepare for legitimate threats. And these threats need to be pertinent and likely to happen in our environment. Let's give an analogy for preparation for weather events. And I'll use the Northeast as an example. There's snowstorms in the Northeast. It's going to happen, so you need to be prepared for that. There's hurricanes, and they're likely. They usually die out by the time they get up north, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're there full force. You need to guard on that too. And then volcanoes, I don't think so. Very unlikely. But then again, in Maui, who was expecting a wildfire? That's more of a California thing. So just like you have to prepare for weather and any other kind of disaster or anything in life for that matter, it's the exact same thing with cyber. You need to be prepared for the current relevant threats. So what are today's threats? I consulted the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, the DBIR, from June of 2023. And this is something that is well respected in the cyber community, and it has a lot of information sourced from all different types of companies, sizes, verticals, government and law enforcement. The link is down below. And there's some key takeaways that I'd like to share with you so we can be educated on some of the latest threats. Breaches. What was involved with the breaches? The human, for one thing. That was involved in 74% of the breaches. Things like stolen credentials, social engineering, things like that. And then external actors had a big part of the breaches as well, at 83%. And a lot of these attackers are financially motivated, like organized crime. And they're going to come in with stolen credentials, phishing, and the exploitation of vulnerabilities. And then don't forget ransomware. That's still around. That's coming out as 24% of the breaches. Next, there's social engineering. 17% of the breaches were from social engineering. What happens is you'll get an email, you click a link, and then you end up revealing sensitive information, or they compromise you in some other way. And then attackers will use pretexting like business email compromise. So what'll happen is a A bad actor is going to send a text or an email or something asking you to take action on something that appears to be legit, but it's actually not. They're trying to get to you because they want something like data or money. So let me give a couple of examples. Let's say you're refinancing a house and some bad actor comes and says, hey, we want you to, this is the title company, we want you to send your money to this routing number and account number, send the money here. Well, that's not good. You don't want to do that. You want it to go to the title company. And then here's something which is terrible as well. So a bad actor may jump into an email account, hijack it, take a look around there, see what kind of information they can find, and then they'll find maybe some supplier information, maybe some old quotes for some product that you wanted to buy a long time ago, and they're going to contact you and trick you into saying, hey, you need to pay your bill for that thing that you ordered. And then you end up paying them the money, not the supplier. Not good. Next, we have web applications and distributed denial of service attacks. There's nothing new here, but the top attacks in the web application area are credential theft and the exploitation of vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities will always be around. Then there's the DDoS attacks. They're not breaches per se, but they are incidents and they were very highly disruptive. And DDoS attacks have been going on a long time, but the thing is the bad guys are sending more and more and more data, so it's filling up your pipes. So that can wreak havoc on your network. And then there's domain name system or DNS DDoS attacks. So what happens there is the bad guys are going to query a cache server, and then it's going to overwhelm the authoritative service. The server that's authoritative will be compromised in that it won't be able to do its job. So that's not good either. Okay, well, we've just talked about a bunch of different threats, and those are the highlights from the Verizon report. I was just skimming the wave top, giving you the top threats. There's a lot more in there. So what do we do about it? Well, you need to either build or strengthen your cybersecurity program to address the most current threats that are relevant. And you can get that from Verizon or any other place. There's lots of threat reports all over the internet. In fact, it's good to use a combination of reports and see if there's any overlap and just get different takes on it. So anyway, the current top threats, that's the top priority. Let's focus on that one now. Now, yes, there's other projects that you can spend your time on, and that's good. You should do that for defense in depth, but let's stop the bleed first and focus on the top threats. Now what we'll do is we'll talk about addressing some of the current threats that we identified here. Let's start with the center of the cyber red triangle, which is the human. So we need to secure the human target. First up is cybersecurity awareness training. Yes, I know. Moaning and groaning. We don't have to like it, we just have to do it. But we need to make sure that we're including phishing and business email compromise. There's a lot of good training out there that go into depth on these things, and they will even have you go through some simulations to see if you can spot the threats. So that is worthwhile. Next up is processes. If you've got some high-risk transactions, have processes for that. So for example, if an executive wants to buy something, wire funds, or do whatever, maybe they'll send an email, sure, but you need to have processes to follow up. Maybe the procedure is that he calls or something like that. but it should be worked out in advance before something bad happens. In that matter, in terms of policies and processes and procedures, it's good to have that for anything, whether it's IT or security, anything that's going to help reduce the probability of human error, because breaches happen because of human errors as well. Finally, multi-factor authentication, or MFA. We've been hearing a lot about that in the news lately with some of the breaches, which I won't go into here. So you need that because accounts are getting hijacked, there's credential thefts, all kinds of bad things that can happen if you don't have multi-factor in place. And you need to use it in more places than where you used it in the past. I mean, you need to have it for the administrators, definitely. And then it needs to be for other people as well, whether it be for remote access or accessing applications. And then with your multi-factor, you might want to add some additional factors like hardware tokens. And if you do, think about getting the FIDO2 tokens because they're phishing resistant. It's less likely for the authentication data to get stolen as well. So think about that. In fact, while you're at it, take a look at all your identity products in place and look at the best practices recommended by the vendor to help make them phish resistant. And then finally, there's adaptive authentication. Well, what's that? Well, this definitely kicks things up a notch. With adaptive authentication, let me just give you an example. Let's say you have a database administrator and he's logging in from some place that he doesn't normally log in from. He's based in the United States, but all of a sudden he's logging in from a foreign country. And let's say you know that he's traveling. All right, well, you might want to challenge him a little bit and maybe give him another factor to use in order to authenticate or something like that, just to reduce risk, especially if he's in a strange country that's not as friendly as some of the others. And then let's take it a step further. What happens if this person logs in from a normal location in the US and then he logs in, allegedly, 5 minutes later from some place that's really, really far away that you could never travel to? It's an impossible travel use case. Well, then you might want to have a more secure authentication strategy there. But you can do it. Let's get into the vertex of the cyber triangle. We'll do the first vertex, and that's securing the email. So most people have secure email gateways in place. Great. Great place to start. You got to have that. But let's kick it up a notch. Do some upgrades. Make sure you can get some machine learning and you can pick up more threats that way. Like you can track users that have a lot of bad things happening, maybe some account takeovers. And then you can also look into something a little bit more technical like authentication, so implementing DMARC and using DKIM and SPF, the abbreviations are right there. And this is probably not for the faint of heart. There's a lot that's involved here, but it's really good because what'll happen is legit email domains, they'll register a DMARC record in the DNS. And so when the email comes into you, okay, it's legit, it's been verified, DMARC, it passes, good to go. But what if it doesn't? What if it's somebody that's spoofing it? Well, it doesn't pass muster. So guess what you can do? You can block the email. Now, this is going to help a lot. And then finally, it's good to have a product or service in place that's going to analyze malicious emails, and you don't want those floating around your organization. So why not have a product that's going to clean it up, clean out those emails, and do it automatically to make life easier for your staff? On to the next vertex, number 2. And this is a big one because we want to secure the internet. So now we'll talk about a couple of Gartner terms. There's Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE, and Security Services Edge, or SSE. So what is SASE? SASE is a bunch of things. It's a big project. If you look at all the components, you have identity and access management, firewalls, secure web gateway, either your virtual private network or maybe Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA, cloud access security broker, and then software-defined wide area network. Okay, what about SSE? SSE is the same as SASE, but guess what? You just take out the SD-WAN. That's it. That's the only difference. But what we'll talk about is SSE, not SASE. And the reason why is because we'll leave it to the network team to worry about the SD-WAN. So first up in SSE is Identity and Access Management. Now this is a humongous undertaking because you have a lot of people involved. You have security, you have IT, you have users, you have human resources. But if you combine that with policies, that's definitely going to help with privilege misuse and human errors. So I'm just going to walk briefly through what an identity program looks like. I wouldn't expect all clients to have a fully baked identity management program, but we'll go through it anyway because it can be built little by little. So you start with Identity Data Management, IDM. Now that's your source of truth. What's that? Okay, well, that's where your users are born. They become employees. Maybe they're entered into a system like Workday by your HR department. So that's where the users are born. But then it may migrate into user lifecycle management. So what's that about? Well, maybe your source of truth feeds into it and starts creating accounts. So users are born there, they're modified, they're terminated there. Or it could be a manual process. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you have it documented and you have good procedures. You can always automate it later on if you haven't already. Then there's access management. Now this is probably the most important, so it's a great place to start. You've got things like Active Directory, where you have your directory services. You've got multi-factor and single sign-on. So start there. And then Privilege Access Management, or PAM. So what you want to do is have a system in place where the admins will log on to the system, and then they'll jump onto the apps or wherever it is that they need to go from there to do their administrative duties. And this is great because if you want to rotate passwords, you can do that in the tool. You can monitor their sessions if you'd like, and that's great for compliance or just tracking troubleshooting or any kind of issues there. And it's great for the applications too, because guess what? People write apps and they bake the passwords into the apps and they never change them. Use that kind of tool for things like that. Do that next. Next, there's access government. We're talking about role-based access, segregation of duties, and then certifying people's access, which is really important for compliance. So look into these next if you so choose. And then later, if you want, you can get into classifying your data, tagging it maybe using a data loss prevention tool or tools. So these are big projects as well, and it's not for everybody, but it's something to consider to see if that would be worthwhile in your organization. Okay, firewalls. Everybody has firewalls. At least they should anyway. And they come in all different form factors. Hardware, VMs, maybe it's a as a service, whatever. Use them as you see fit and use the form factor that makes sense. Maybe consider using some of the features and subscriptions that are offered by the firewall vendors. So kick up your firewalls a notch or two. Make sure that you have the capability to identify users rather than IP addresses, because with DHCP and all that, IPs change, but you can track users through incidents that are happening over multiple days or even weeks of activity. It's a lot easier in the logs. And then applications, it's great to have that layer 7 rather than just your traditional ports and protocols. You get a lot more context there. And then there's intrusion prevention that can be a subscription in the firewalls. Really great for north-south traffic. Stop the traffic. You can do it east and west too if you have firewalls in there. Maybe you might even think about something in addition to that capability that's on the outside, another tool, maybe network detection and response. That's usually for the east-west traffic. Then there's DNS security in the firewall as a subscription. Hackers love DNS. They like to tunnel their traffic in the DNS because it just sort of blends in. It's like gray man traffic. They also like to use domain generation algorithms because for their command and control servers, when your infected hosts are beaconing out to the CNCs, they're going to use a lot of different domains for the CNC servers. And so that's why they make these algorithms, to keep changing things up, to make things less trackable. And then there's malware protection in your sandboxes that are good to have. There's more out there, but those are some good key ones to consider. And again, you can use different tools for this. It doesn't have to be the firewall and their subscription. You can use alternative tools, or if you're really into it and you want a lot of defense in depth, later on as you build your program and you've already got the fundamentals dialed in, you might want to combine the alternative tools plus a subscription. Okay, how about Secure Web Gateway? It's been around forever, and it's really good because it'll help protect the users from the threats. When you go to bad websites, drive-bys, whatever you have, maybe it won't let people go to websites that are really not trusted. Maybe, things like porn, or, that's completely inappropriate, but other than that, maybe you want them to go to, make sure they're not going to gambling websites or just anything that is marked as a high risk. You want to keep people out. But it just depends on your culture and your corporate policy. And you can do this sort of subscription on a firewall, maybe it's a separate tool. And then maybe you can consider doing SSL decryption. If you want to inspect that traffic, you're going to want to use URL filtering because you don't want to intercept people's banking traffic or medical traffic as they check their medical and their banking websites. But SSL decryption, that's a project in and of itself, and here's why. There's a lot of testing that you have to do. You have to make sure the URL filtering works. You have to have the certificates just right. If they're missing a semicolon or a comma, it takes forever to troubleshoot that. I know, because it happened to me. It was awful. And then you have to test all the different operating systems and different browsers and different versions. It's something that you really have to make sure that it's been thoroughly vetted in your organization. Maybe you want to do that, maybe not. It's just up to you. Next, there's VPNs, or maybe Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA. So if you're running VPNs, you need to have multi-factor. period, for everybody. Do that at a minimum. But if you want to kick things up a notch, you can consider using ZTNA to replace the VPN. And that will give you more security in the sense that you're connecting the right users to the apps that they have access to, not just any app, just the one that they need to have access to. And you need to have them authenticate every time. Whereas with a VPN, if people VPN in and they go to an app or whatever, a server, and they try and access, once you're in, you're in. Okay, there might be some timeouts. You get kicked out after a few hours or maybe even an hour or two. But ZTNA, it's every time you authenticate. But it is a big project, so you need to have security and networking and a lot of testing going on. So think about that. And then we talked about the other SSE projects like email and firewalls and all of that. At least get those things started. Get them up to the foundational level and solid. It doesn't have to be fully implemented with all of the bells and whistles, but consider doing that between starting the ZTNA migration. And you can always come back and revisit the other projects later on. Next up is Cloud Access Security Broker. This goes hand in hand with some of the other things that we talked about looking to see if people should or shouldn't go to websites that have been found to be high risk. A lot of CASBs will do risk assessments on certain websites, and then you might want to think about maybe blocking it. Or maybe some websites and services are not a cultural fit. Maybe you can have your users go to your Dropbox for your organization, but maybe not their own personal Dropbox. But anyway, something to think about. But if it were me personally, I would address the other things first, all the SSE projects, maybe even ZTNA. I've talked with some clients, sometimes, they have it, but they don't know what to do with it once they have the CASB. And so they're not in the place yet to be blocking, but maybe they will someday. Just depends on the use case and the cultural fit in the organization. Okay, this is the last of the web protection section here. So, web application security, you've heard the term shifting left, maybe incorporating security into the development cycle. So, that's a good thing to do. You need to have all your SDLCs in place. And it can be a very difficult conversation as a security person to talk to the head of software and tell them things that they need to do for their software program when you're not even a developer. Very, very awkward. I know, I've been there when I was consulting. It's not a easy thing to do, but it has to be done. And especially if they're going for compliance, and that's what I was doing. It was PCI consulting. Anyway, other things that organizations can do is they should look for threats not just in their own code, and we all know about static and dynamic application security testing. That's a given. But if they're developing APIs themselves, they should test that out and look for threats there and make sure that's secure. Or what if they're forking over some open source security tools and putting them into your own tools? Well, you need to make sure that open source code that you're forking over is secure as well. So think about these kind of tools. It's not just about the static and dynamic testing. Use a WAF. Okay, good. Those have been around. Use it. And then consider using a third party to do your vulnerability testing and your penetration testing. and then you can remediate the findings afterwards. Don't forget about DDoS mitigation. Make sure you have services and products in place to help in that area. Sometimes there's services that'll take care of the WAF and the DDoS for you. Sometimes it can be your ISP. Check them out and check out the other tools as well. Okay, the last of the 3 vertices, Vertex 3. The user endpoints. We've got to secure the endpoints because they are the last line of defense. And it's not just about the endpoints, it's about the servers as well. Because guess what? The bad guys come in, they attack the endpoints, and then they move laterally and they pivot over and they get into the servers and then they take it from there. So technically, servers are an endpoint, but a lot of people think that endpoints are just for the users, and so I just wanted to make sure that I say that you should have a solution deployed to the endpoints for the users and the servers. And so a good solution is going to have different ways of detecting threats, and it can be anything from signatures, which there's nothing wrong with signatures. It's a really quick and easy and cheap, down and dirty way to get some of the threats taken care of. But you also have to have more than that. You need to be able to detect threats before, during, and after. And you need machine learning and a lot of algorithms, and everybody has their algorithm. And of course, every endpoint vendor says their algorithms are the best, but you need to be the judge. You need to have endpoint detection and response as well as the next generation antivirus. You need to have EDR because that's like a big VCR recorder, recording video camera, storing a lot of forensic behavior on the endpoint. So we're talking about processes and parent processes, child processes launching, people logging in, logging out, network connections, all kinds of things, nitty-gritty details. This is awesome stuff for incident response. Why is that? Well, because if somebody penetrates into your network and gets on the endpoint, you can see them coming in, you can see them what they're doing, and you can see them when they leave, and you're capturing the whole thing live on video. It's great. And while we're at it with incident response, do you have forensic people on staff? How skilled are they in getting to the bottom of a breach like ransomware or anything else? Well, think about getting a retainer where you can secure experts, get a retainer in place. So when something bad happens, you know who to call and they can jump on it right away. They've got service level agreements in place. It's a lot easier than having an emergency happen and then calling 911. Have it ready. So once again, get the endpoint solution deployed to all the operating systems. And do it everywhere. Sometimes people are getting attacked because they don't have it on all the endpoints and the servers. That's not good. And realize sometimes you can't with old operating systems. These tools only work for certain operating systems. You got to check the vendors. And I get it. Sometimes you can't upgrade the operating system because you have a legacy application running on it. You have to do some things in the meantime to compensate some additional controls that you wouldn't normally have in the other endpoints, but it's just something to think about. You might have to use application whitelisting or something like that. But eventually, you know what to do. Easier said than done, I know. It's not always convenient. Consider using tools that have a bunch of different modules. What do I mean by that? Well, you've got your antivirus and your EDR and all of that, but maybe you want something in there to manage your your BitLocker for your encryption, or keep track of the endpoints for hygiene. See what's installed on what endpoint and has it been patched, things like that. Maybe some identity for your Active Directory. There's all kinds of stuff out there these days. And speaking of hygiene, we've got vulnerability management. Vulnerabilities, they're always there, so you have to be hygienic. You've got to practice everyday cyber hygiene. It's like preventing the cold and flu during the cold and flu season. What do? You wash your hands, you wear a mask, you watch your distance. Okay, those are just the basics. But of course, there's a lot of other things that you can do too, just like in cyber. Oh yeah, you can eat right and exercise right. It's the same thing with cyber. Do the basics, and there's other things that you can do too that you can add on later. And remember, in cyber, every day is cold and flu season in cybersecurity. So know the endpoints, keep track of them, know your assets, know what's installed on them, make sure they're patched. It's not sexy, but again, you might not like it, but it's something that really needs to be done to mitigate risk. And make sure you've got coverage everywhere. It's not just about the endpoints, but what about your routers and switches? You got to patch those too. And also scan as well. Make sure that there's no open telnet ports on the switch or the router. Okay, wrapping up. So, we've talked about the latest threats, and then we talked about some actions to take because we want to stop the threats, just stop the bleeding with the really relevant top threats, and then move over later after skimming the wave tops and address the other threats, and then keep building the security program from there. Shore it up. We also want to make sure that we have the right people and processes in place. It's not just about the technology, it's not just about the shiny new tool, but we do want to exercise due diligence. So don't delay on the top threats. Keep building, keep the program going, and most important of all, never quit. Thank you.